Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure being here. I hadn't expected the weather to be snow. I mean, I think it's wonderful, but when you come from San Diego, it is unexpected. I got into this in an unusual way. Some years ago, 28 years ago, I had the opportunity to put together a Department of Preventive Medicine at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego. And as part of that department, we built a series of risk abatement programs, one of which was a weight program. And by 1985, we were seeing about 1,500 people a year in the program. We were very disturbed by the high dropout rate that we had. What was particularly disturbing was the people dropping out were the ones who successfully were losing weight. I mean, that really drove us nuts. And ultimately, in despair, I started interviewing a large number of people who were dropping out in the course of successfully losing weight. And having no idea what I was looking for, did basically a social worker's timeline interview. What did you weigh when you were born, when you were in kindergarten, 6th grade? I put in a question in this sequence, how old were you when you first became sexually active? And I misspoke myself early on and asked some woman how much she weighed when she first became sexually active. And she said 40 pounds and then blurted out it was with my father and started sobbing. And as I pursued the issue, it really became quite disturbed because it seemed every other person I was talking with was giving me a history of childhood sexual abuse. And I remember thinking, I mean, this can't be, people would know if this were true. Somebody would have told me, wasn't that what medical school was for? And slowly I came to see, A, it was true, B, nobody wanted to hear about it.
Dear Dr. Felitti, I want to thank you for caring enough about people to read all those charts and finding out what happens to so many of us who are molested, raped, and abused in childhood. I suffered for years. The pain became so great I was thinking of jumping off the San Diego Bay Bridge. How many people may have taken their life because they had no one to turn to? How many lives can be saved by your work?
I presented our findings at a national obesity meeting in Atlanta in 1990. Some guy gets up from the audience and under the guise of asking a question makes the pronouncement, you really need to understand, Dr. Felitti, that people who are more fluent in these matters, like obviously they, recognize that these statements by patients are largely fabrications to provide a cover explanation for failed lives. And I remember standing on the stage thinking, wow, I've really changed. Because had that happened to me 20 or 30 years earlier, I'd have been petrified. And now I'm standing there thinking, do I tell this wretch what I think of him in public or let it slide? I decided to let it slide. There was a dinner meeting for speakers that night, and a scientist from the CDC was seated next to me, David Williamson, and he said, Look,
Dr. Felitti, if what you're saying is true, it's got enormous importance for the country as well as the practice of medicine. But nobody's going to believe your 286 cases. What we need is a large, epidemiologically sound study from a general population.
With thousands of people in it. He then went back to the CDC and ultimately invited me there to speak and introduced me to a physician epidemiologist there named Robert Anda.
I was dedicated to prevention, and I saw the greatest opportunity for prevention I ever could have imagined.
If we could begin to understand the underpinnings of personal health behaviors, then we could go farther lower in the lifespan and begin to do what is really true prevention.
The ACE study centered on asking 26,000 consecutive adults coming through for comprehensive medical evaluation if they would help us understand more how traumatic life experiences in childhood might affect adult health and well-being. 70% of them agreed to participate. You know, you're crazy. You can't ask patients questions like that. Well, they'll be furious and no one will tell you the truth anyway. If anybody was upset, you know, amazingly, I never got wind of it. And I think sure as hell I would have heard because there are a lot of people waiting and hoping that, you know, that was going to happen, and I simply stopped this stuff. I have a notebook of letters, largely from elderly women, one of which memorably reads, she wrote in pencil on lined paper, "Thank you for asking. I feared I would die and no one would ever know what had happened." We studied 10 categories of adverse childhood experience, and we created something called an ACE score. If you were exposed to none of those 10 categories, the score was 0. If you were exposed to all 10, the score was 10. Anything in between, the score would be intermediate. It was hard to believe initially, as I had found it hard to believe in the obesity program. This was a very middle-class population. 74% of the people had been to college. Everybody had high-end medical insurance. You know, if things are this bad in a clearly middle-class population, they surely don't get better. You know, if you're living in poverty or on the street or in prison. And what we saw over and over again, that as the ACE score went up, the probability of the outcome went up. So this was a very, very big idea, that the issue of chronic major unrelieved stress, which could be 30 or 50 years back, produces these neurochemical changes that are very damaging to different areas of the body. In the final analysis, it's clear that adverse childhood experiences are a major or the major factor underlying the 10 most common causes of death in the United States.
The first question is for you, Dr. Felitti. How well are these ACE interviews being integrated into physician practice, medical school curricula, therapist, counselor training?
Piece of cake.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Thank you very much. Next question.
The resistance to using it is enormous.
Why so?
I suspect that there are at least several reasons, one of which undoubtedly is personal ghosts. Presenting this to large medical audiences, 200, 300, 400 physicians. By about 8 minutes, the level of anguish on people's faces exceeds anything that I would be willing to attribute to empathic responses. I mean, it seems pretty clear to me that personal ghosts are being awakened.
Like anyone else, a significant number of physicians have grown up in really troubled homes, been abused in various ways, etc. And I suspect that many don't want to revisit their own past. And that's really sort of the theme of all of this, that damaging and destructive things are happening and no one knows because no one speaks about it. I'll give you an example out of my own family. My uncle, poor immigrant from Sicily, he's a men's tailor in New York, and he's really doing well. 2 sons. One son is the family hero. He was a big baseball fan. His younger brother grows up wanting to be a baseball player. One day, the younger brother breaks his arm, and his arm heals with a flexion contracture. Cannot straighten it out. Well, obviously, his hopes for playing professional baseball are gone. He's 11. A year or so later, he begins putting on weight, and then a lot of weight, and begins smoking, and heavily. Well, I mean, we kids thought, wow, he's really grown up. I mean, he's smoking 2 packs a day, like Humphrey Bogart. Wow, he's really grown up. So here's this teenager who has become a 2-pack-a-day smoker and very obese. At 20, he becomes a type 2 diabetic. At age 40, he dies of a heart attack. Years later, after all of the relevant people are dead, I get the rest of the story from an elderly aunt. That he didn't break his arm. His mother, in a fit of rage, broke his arm. And I thought, my God, what must that be like? Your mother breaks your arm. Your hopes for the future are gone. So, it was really an extraordinary insight into the difficulty, the concealment, the shame. And then years later, I'm looking at some old photographs, and I find a picture of his mother as a young woman, in her early 20s, looks like, on a beach in Long Island, slender, gorgeous. Wow. I mean, what happened to her? What happened to her? One of the things that we came to realize was that there was this huge public health paradox, wherein many of the things that are our most difficult public health problems are indeed that, but from the standpoint of the individual involved, are often unconsciously attempted solutions to problems that the rest of us know nothing about. Nobody smokes 2 packs a day to get heart disease or lung cancer. People smoke for the psychoactive benefits of nicotine. Nobody drinks a quart of bourbon a day to get cirrhosis and die from that. Everybody has heard of, the evils of crystal meth. Well, nobody realizes that the first successful antidepressant medication introduced for prescription sale in 1940 in the United States was methamphetamine. The very same substance that in impure form and unknown dose on the street is called crystal meth. It's a lot easier to say, my kid's buying that damn crystal meth because there's a dealer on the next block, than it is to say, my kid's buying antidepressants on the street. The whole issue of depression is a good one because it's a common problem. And the question is, why are people depressed? Not because of the neurochemical imbalance, that's essential, but that's an intermediary step, not a basic cause. So people talk in terms of depression, serotonin levels are altered, dopamine levels are altered. Absolutely. Those are essential intermediary processes that have to be there. Now the question is, why are they altered? And what's clear is that life experience is what alters them. When I speak on this, I have a slide that I use. It's very helpful in getting this idea across. It's a slide of a PET scan of the brains of 2 little boys. In one brain, nothing much has happened to him. In the other PET scan, we have the brain of a 3-year-old little boy taken from a Romanian orphanage. Romanian orphanages were extraordinary in the level of neglect that they imposed. And what's really striking when you look at those two brains is in the Romanian kid, there are large areas where there is no color whatsoever, where there is no biochemical activity going on. And I don't think it's going to tax anyone's imagination too much to think that at age 3, when brain is being built, when connections are being made, when the wiring is being laid down, that this lack of biochemical activity there is going to affect the function and the structure of those areas of brain. The biggest public health advance I can conceive of in present times would be, my best thinking would be, it would involve figuring out how to improve parenting skills across the nation. You know, I grew up in a financially and educationally extremely well-supported setting. It was a miserable house. It was a fancy house. It was the second best house in town. I mean, I think it was a good metaphor that the house looked terrific on the outside, but there were certain major things missing on the inside. We had 3 people in the house, my father, my mother, and I. And, the most common contact between us was probably the dog circling between the 3 of us. The idea of emotional neglect is a powerful and damaging kind of thing.
It's my great honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Vincent Felitti to you. For 27 years, he was the head of the preventative medicine program at Kaiser Permanente. We recently gave Dr. Felitti our Lifetime Achievement Award at Alliance for Hope International's 15th annual conference. Without question, he is one of the leading doctors in the world on childhood trauma. Dr. Felitti's work is so unbelievably groundbreaking. The question now is, what do we do about it? How do we change the ending?
Sometimes people who lose a large amount of weight, say 100 pounds, regain it all, if not more. Lose 100, regain 120. When that happens, why does that happen? It was really an extraordinary thing, okay? People whom we had never met before, given that question. And always the first answer would be, because if you don't deal with the underlying issues, it'll come back. If anyone had asked me 30 years ago if I'd be interested in this, I probably would have said no. It's interesting how sometimes the most important things you get involved in come about seemingly by accident.